Welcome to week 3 of the Glow Quilt Along. I'm Jamie, I run Thread the Needle Fabrics, and I'm going to be going over strip piecing. So we're going to piece, which means sew, all of the quilt top together today. So to start off, you're going to need your fabric already cut into 3 1/4 inch pieces that are width of fabric, so about 44 inches wide from selvage to selvage. And you're going to need your sewing machine, a pair of thread snips, seam ripper, because we all need those no matter how long you've sewn. And I'm using 50 weight cotton thread and a universal top stitch needle. So what I like to do to keep everything in order is make sure that I have all of my fabric laid out in the order that I'm going to be sewing it in. If you ordered the quilt kit, which there's still some available in the shop, they came laid out in order, and there's also a sticker sheet with them so that you can label them in case you're thinking of starting and stopping, or you've got some cute little critters in your house like a cat who likes to play with things, just to keep them nice and organized so that you don't have to wonder what's what. So I have them laid out next to me, and we're gonna start strip piecing. So you're gonna wanna pull your first 2 colors that you're using. And I'm not following the Glow Quilt order right now, just to keep it so that you can actually see the difference in the colors while I'm doing this. So I'm gonna go ahead and use these 2 gorgeous colors here. The first thing to do is figure out the right side and the wrong side of your fabric, which the right side of your fabric is the side that you want showing. If you're using solid colors like this, it doesn't really matter. Because this is art gallery fabric and they have a print on their selvage, I'm going to be keeping that all on one side just because I'm a little anal like that, but you definitely don't need to if you're using solid colors. If you're using a print fabric, that's where you really want to make sure that you're always placing right sides together. So the pretty side of your fabric always goes together when you're sewing. And that's going to make sure that your seams are all on the same side and all the pretty fabrics on the top. Go ahead and take your 2 fabrics with the right sides facing each other, put them together, and then you want to carefully line them up. And this is why cutting very carefully is super important for getting this quilt top square and not having it be all wobbly. So take your time when you're cutting your fabric. So also because this is art gallery, it's a little bit slippier than regular quilting cotton because their thread count's very high. There's a bit of a sheen to it, which, oh my God, makes their colors amazing. But anyways, I like to use a pin. So I would just make sure that my fabric's nicely lined up all on the edge here. And then I just place 1 pin at the top, just like that. So it's just there, and that's just going to help keep things in place when I start sewing. So we're going to be using a 1/4 inch seam and a regular foot. It's actually a 1/4 inch foot. So if you want to test that, you can take a measuring tape and just measure from the edge of right below your needle to the edge of your presser foot to figure out if it's going to be a 1/4 inch seam if you're not sure about the foot that you're using. And now I'm going to start sewing, and you don't need to do a back stitch at this point during the piecing of the quilt. So you just sew nice and carefully along there. If your fabric starts to get a little bit separated, you can just put it back together. Just make sure that you're going slowly and carefully making sure that your fabric stays right on the edge of the presser foot there. If you don't have a 1/4 inch foot, you can always use a piece of tape along here to line up to make sure that you're going to be going at a 1/4 inch from the needle. And also just make sure that your needle is centered. You can play around with your machine for that to make sure that you are on that 1/4 inch. Actually, along those lines, if you don't have a 1/4 inch foot, you can play around with your needle position to make sure that you have a 1/4 inch stitch line going. So we're just going to carefully do this all the way down, going nice and slow to make sure that you're keeping it straight. Doing this part properly, like very carefully and precisely, is going to make your whole quilt come together beautifully. So I'm just going to skip ahead. So as I'm sewing off the edge here, you can see that already the fabric is at different lengths. And that's because, not because I misaligned them or anything like that in this case, it's because sometimes bolts of fabric are just slightly varying lengths. And that's why this next step is so important. So I'm just sewing right off the edge here. You can just do a few stitches off, cut your thread, lift that piece up, This is the really important step when it comes to strip piecing fabric, to make sure that your quilt top stays as square as possible as you're doing it. So we started on this end with the pin. This is also why I like pinning. It helps you kind of remember where you started. Started on that end with the pin. I sewed all the way down with the right sides facing, and this is where I ended off. So I'm going to start my next strip here, and I'm going to align it to what is the fabric that is the edge piece. So like the first piece of fabric, which in this case, we're going to make this color the first. This is what's going to be the edge of my quilt. So here's the right sides. There's the seam, the wrong side of the fabric. And I'm going to start sewing going this direction from where I ended. So, and I'm going to line up my next piece with the edge piece on this side. So I'm placing right sides together, and I'm lining up my new piece with my edge piece. And another thing to note with the fabric, if you're going to be actually, like in the case of the Glow Quilt, leaving the whole piece together and not cutting anything afterwards, is that you want to pay attention to these selvage markings, because if you have your selvage markings at the end, kind of all over on both sides, then you're going to have to make sure that you're trimming that off on both sides, which can make your quilt skinnier. So I like to keep all my selvage markings on one end of the quilt. So I've got my selvage ends that don't have any markings on them, that are right sides together, and I'm lining it up with my edge piece, just like that. I'm going to pop a pin in there and then sew. Well, I've got these three sewn together, and I'm going to add another piece starting at the edge that I finished off that stitch line on. So we're going to grab this one, and I've got all my selvages on this end of the quilt. So I'm going to put right sides together, and I'm going to do my best to line up this with, once again, the edge of the quilt. And then you just do another little pin and sew. And you just keep doing this the whole way down until you have all 20 of your 3/4 inch strips pieced together. And next week, we're going to go over pressing the seams and which direction to press the seams in. If you're wanting to jump ahead, basically make sure that you lift your iron up, put it down, don't push it around because you can stretch out the fabric. Use steam and press all your seams going in one direction. Don't press them going this way and that way and this way and that way. Just make sure they're all going one direction. And I'll go over a little bit of why about seam pressing and why that's important next week. So happy sewing. Send me questions if you want, and hashtag Glow Quilt Along to share your progress. I'd love to see it.